Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
The subway has been my way of getting to and from my job at the call center downtown. The commute isn't terrible, usually about 35 minutes each way, but after standing on your feet all day dealing with angry customers, those subway seats become absolutely precious. My shift ends at 6 in the evening, which means I'm always catching the train during rush hour. The station I use is one of the earlier stops on the line, so there's usually a chance to grab a seat if you time it right. The benches on the platform are these old metal ones, nothing fancy, but they're a godsend when you're waiting for a train that's running late. That Tuesday, my feet were killing me more than usual. We'd been understaffed, so I'd covered an extra 2 hours, and my cheap work shoes were not doing me any favors. I got to the platform and immediately spotted the bench. Then I saw him. This guy, probably in his mid-30s, was sitting on the bench with his bags spread out across every single available spot. And I'm not talking about 1 or 2 bags. This man had 5 bags of various sizes taking up the entire bench. Shopping bags, a backpack, a duffel bag, you name it. He was just sitting there on his phone, completely relaxed, like he owned the whole platform. There were already 4 other people standing nearby, clearly waiting for the train. An older woman was leaning against the wall, shifting her weight from foot to foot. A younger guy had his backpack on the ground and kept checking his watch. 2 other commuters were just standing there looking exhausted. I walked up to the bench and stood right in front of the guy. He looked up at me briefly, then went back to his phone. I waited a moment, thinking maybe he'd get the hint. Nothing. The older woman caught my eye and shook her head slightly, like she'd already tried. I politely asked if he could move one of his bags so someone could sit down. He looked up at me, then looked back at his phone. No response whatsoever. I couldn't tell if he genuinely didn't understand English or if he was just pretending not to hear me. I tried again, this time more directly, asking him to please move his bags because people needed to sit. Still nothing. He shifted slightly, adjusting his position on the bench, but didn't touch a single bag. The younger guy with the backpack tried too. He told the guy to come on and just move 1 bag. The guy on the bench finally spoke, but it was just some dismissive wave of his hand, and something muttered that none of us could understand. Then he went right back to scrolling on his phone. I looked at my watch. The next train wasn't due for another 12 minutes. 12 more minutes of standing while this guy sprawled out like he was in his living room. The older woman sat down on the ground, which made me feel even worse about the situation. But what could we do? He clearly wasn't going to move his stuff, and we couldn't exactly throw his bags on the ground. Those 12 minutes felt like forever. My feet throbbed with each passing moment. I kept staring at that bench, at all those bags just sitting there while actual human beings had to stand. The guy never once looked uncomfortable or guilty. He just sat there, completely unbothered. Finally, I heard the rumble of the approaching train. We all perked up, getting ready to board. The older woman struggled to her feet. Everyone gathered their things. The train pulled into the station and the doors opened. It was packed for that time of day, but I could see through the windows that there were a handful of empty seats scattered throughout the car. Maybe 5 or 6 total. Here's where it got interesting. The guy on the bench suddenly sprang into action. He grabbed his bags, all 5 of them, and rushed toward the train doors. He was clearly planning to grab one of those seats for himself. Everyone else was filing in, but he was moving with purpose, pushing past people with his bags. I was right behind him. I watched him scan the car, spot an empty seat near the middle, and start making his way toward it. He had to navigate through the crowd, juggling all his bags, bumping into people left and right. I stayed close, real close. I watched him get closer to that empty seat, watched him start to position himself to sit down, and right at the last possible second, just when he was about to lower himself into that seat, I quickly stepped around him and dropped into it. His mouth actually fell open. He stood there, bags in hand, frozen for a moment. He looked around frantically, but in those few seconds, other passengers had claimed the remaining empty seats. Every single one was now taken. I settled into my seat, made direct eye contact with him, and smiled. Not a friendly smile, a satisfied, you got what you deserved smile. He stared at me, finally showing some emotion. He said something in whatever language he'd been pretending not to speak, and I just shrugged and pulled out my own phone. He had no choice but to stand there in the crowded train car, holding all 5 of his precious bags, for the next 40 minutes until his stop. The older woman who'd been sitting on the platform floor managed to get a seat too, thankfully. She caught my eye and gave me a little knowing nod. The younger guy who'd tried to help earlier was standing nearby and actually had to turn away to hide his grin. I watched the guy struggle with his bags every time the train lurched or stopped. People bumped into him. He had to keep adjusting his grip. His arms were clearly getting tired. Meanwhile, I sat there comfortably for my entire 35-minute ride, feeling absolutely no guilt whatsoever. I lost my leg some years ago. Not that I owe anyone that information, but that's what happened. The recovery was brutal. Months of physical therapy, learning to walk again with a prosthetic, dealing with phantom pain that still wakes me up some nights. But the hardest part wasn't the physical stuff. It was how people treated me afterward. When strangers would stop me and bluntly ask what happened, I'd make up ridiculous stories. Shark attack, wrestled an alligator, lost a bet. Sometimes I'd even commit to the bit and add elaborate details. I thought if I could laugh about it, maybe it wouldn't bother me so much. But it did bother me, more and more over time. People would literally stop me in parking lots, reach out and grab my arm to get my attention, and immediately launch into their interrogation. No hello, no excuse me, just straight to asking what happened to my leg. I'd be pushing my cart down a crowded grocery aisle trying to get my shopping done, and someone would block my path to demand my medical history. I'd be rushing to a doctor's appointment, already stressed, and a complete stranger would feel entitled to know the most traumatic event of my life. The thing was realizing that children had better manners than most adults. Kids would sometimes stare. That's normal, they're curious, but if they asked, it was always innocent and respectful. They'd usually say hi first, or their parents would gently remind them not to point. But grown adults? They acted like my body was public property, like my trauma was entertainment they deserved access to. I tried being polite, I tried ignoring them, I tried giving vague answers. Nothing worked. They'd just press harder, get offended if I didn't want to share, or tell me I should be grateful they're even talking to me. Last month I had a work trip to another city. The project I was working on required me to be on site for a few weeks, so my company put me up in a decent hotel downtown. The work was stressful, lots of early mornings and late nights. I'd taken up smoking again during the recovery, a bad habit I'd kicked years ago, but the stress brought it back. That morning I barely slept. The phantom pain had been bad, and I tossed and turned most of the night. By 6 a.m. I gave up on sleep, got dressed, and went outside for a cigarette. The sun was just starting to come up and the air was cold. I was standing there in the hotel's designated smoking area, trying to wake myself up and mentally prepare for another long day. Then she came outside, middle-aged woman, probably in her 50s, dressed in workout clothes, like she was about to hit the hotel gym. She looked at me and I watched her eyes immediately drop to my prosthetic leg. I knew what was coming. I always know. She walked right up to me, didn't even pause to light her own cigarette first. Without any greeting or introduction, she immediately asked what I had done to lose my leg. Not good morning, not hello, not even asking if she could join me. Just straight to the invasive question, like I was some kind of curiosity exhibit at a museum. I was exhausted. I was in pain. I was stressed about work, and I was so tired of this happening. I told her that she hadn't said good morning, hadn't said hello, and hadn't even asked me my name. Yet she felt entitled to my medical history. I asked her if she would like that to happen to her. She went from curious to furious in half a second. She said I was being rude and that she was just being friendly. I responded that friendly would be introducing herself. Friendly would be treating me like a person instead of a puzzle she was owed the answer to. She started swearing at me, calling me a rude witch and saying she was just trying to make conversation. I asked her if making conversation meant asking about my trauma. I asked if that was really her idea of a conversation. She told me to go to hell and called me a terrible word. She said she hoped I was miserable with that attitude. She was getting loud now, loud enough that other people were starting to look out the hotel windows. I just stood there smoking my cigarette, trying to keep my hands from shaking. I told her I was miserable. I told her it was because people like her thought my disability made me public property. I explained that she thought she was entitled to know my story, my pain, my worst day, just because she was curious. I said she didn't see me as a person, she saw me as a spectacle. She yelled that she was being nice and that I should be grateful anyone wanted to talk to me. That line hit something in me. The implication that I should be thankful for her rudeness, that my disability made me so undesirable that any attention was a gift. I told her I didn't need her version of nice. I said what I needed was for her to treat me with basic human decency, and if she couldn't do that, then she should just leave me alone. She was sputtering now, trying to come up with another insult, when the hotel's front desk manager came outside. He'd apparently been watching through the window. He asked if everything was all right out here. She immediately switched tactics, turned on the charm. She told him I was harassing her and that she had just been trying to be friendly when I started attacking her. The manager looked at me, then back at her. He said he had watched the entire interaction from inside. He pointed out that she had approached me and that she was the one who had been yelling and using profanity. He told her he was going to have to ask her to go back to her room. She started yelling about discrimination and said she was going to leave such a bad review. She said we were both going to regret this. The manager told her that was her right, but right now, she needed to leave this guest alone. She stormed off, still talking about lawsuits and reviews and how terrible we both were. The manager waited until she was inside, then turned to me. He apologized for what had happened. He explained that they got a lot of business travelers at the hotel and sometimes people forgot their manners. He asked if I was okay. I wasn't really. I was shaking, adrenaline dumping into my system from the confrontation, but I nodded and thanked him for stepping in. He said of course, and told me that for what it was worth, I had handled that perfectly. He said I didn't owe anyone my story. I finished my cigarette in peace after that. The manager went back inside and I stood there watching the sun come up over the city, thinking about how exhausting it is to exist in a body that other people think they have a right to interrogate. Every single day felt like a battle to just be seen as a normal person instead of a walking question mark. I thought about all the times I've been stopped, questioned, treated like public property. I thought about how many times I tried to be polite and accommodating, hoping that would make people back off, only to realize it never did. The woman's words kept echoing in my head, that I should be grateful anyone wanted to talk to me. Like my worth had been diminished along with my leg. Like I should thank people for their invasive questions and boundary violations because what else did I have to offer? But standing there in the quiet morning air, with the manager's words still fresh in my mind, something shifted. I realized I wasn't wrong for setting boundaries. I wasn't rude for expecting basic courtesy. I wasn't a witch for wanting to be treated like a person first and an amputee second. The rest of my day went surprisingly well. I got through my meetings, handled the project issues that came up, and even managed to grab dinner with a colleague who didn't once ask about my leg. We talked about work, about the city, about normal things. It was refreshing. When I got back to the hotel that evening, the front desk manager was still on duty. He waved me over and told me that the woman from that morning had checked out early. Apparently, she'd demanded to speak to his supervisor about the incident, and when the supervisor reviewed the security footage from the smoking area, they'd backed him up completely. She'd left in a huff, threatening legal action that everyone knew would never materialize. He told me he was glad I was still staying with them and hoped the rest of my trip would be peaceful. I thanked him again and headed up to my room. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. Maybe it was exhaustion from the long day, or maybe it was something else. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I'd actually stood up for myself in a way that mattered. I hadn't been mean or cruel, I'd just asked for basic respect, and when someone couldn't give me that, I hadn't backed down. The next few weeks of my work trip were blissfully uneventful. I still got the occasional stare, the curious look, but nobody else approached me with invasive questions. Maybe I was just lucky, or maybe I developed a don't mess with me energy that kept people at bay. On my last day in the city, I saw the manager again when I was checking out. He asked how the rest of my stay had been, and I told him it was great. He smiled and said he was glad to hear it. Then he said something that stuck with me. He told me his sister was also an amputee, and she dealt with the same thing all the time. He said watching me stand up for myself that morning reminded him to be more protective of her boundaries too. I left that hotel feeling different than when I'd arrived. Not fixed, not healed, but stronger somehow. I realized that every time I set a boundary, every time I called out someone's rudeness, I was making it a little easier for the next person like me. I was pushing back against this idea that disabled people owe the world an explanation for existing. When I got home, I made a decision. I wasn't going to keep making up funny stories to deflect invasive questions anymore. I wasn't going to laugh it off or try to make other people comfortable with their own rudeness. If someone wanted to know about my leg, they could start by treating me like a human being. They could introduce themselves, make small talk, build some kind of rapport, and if they couldn't do that basic thing, then they didn't deserve to know my story. It's been a month since that morning at the hotel, and I've used that same response 3 more times when strangers have approached me with invasive questions. 2 of them got defensive and angry, just like the woman at the hotel, but one actually apologized. She said she hadn't thought about how rude she was being, and she thanked me for pointing it out. That one interaction made all the others worth it. I know I'll keep dealing with this for the rest of my life. People will keep staring, keep asking, keep treating my body like it's public property. But now I know I don't have to accept it. I can set boundaries, I can demand respect, and I can walk away from anyone who can't give me that basic courtesy. My now husband and I had met at a coffee shop where he was a regular and I was the new barista, trying not to mess up everyone's orders. He was patient, kind, and always left a generous tip even when I accidentally gave him decaf instead of his usual espresso. We started talking more than dating, and honestly, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. The wedding planning was relatively smooth. We kept it simple, nothing too extravagant. About 100 guests, mostly family and close friends. My cousin worked as a police officer, and even though he was technically off duty that day, he still showed up in his usual alert mode. That's just how he was, always aware of his surroundings. There was one person my husband mentioned a few times during our relationship that made me a bit uncomfortable. This woman from his gym who kept trying to start conversations with him, asking him out for coffee, showing up wherever he happened to be working out. He always brushed her off politely, told her he was in a relationship, but she didn't seem to get the message. He eventually changed gyms because it got so awkward. The ceremony went beautifully. I walked down the aisle, we said our vows, and I actually managed not to cry until the very end. Everyone clapped, we kissed and headed to the reception area. That's where things took a turn. We were about an hour into the reception when I noticed a woman I didn't recognize standing near the entrance. She wasn't dressed for a wedding, just jeans and a t-shirt, and she was staring intensely at my husband. I nudged him and pointed her out. My husband's face went pale. He told me that was her, the woman from the gym. I asked him how she even knew about this. He said he had no idea and that he never told her anything. Before we could figure out what to do, she started walking toward us. The smile on her face wasn't friendly. It was something else entirely. Something possessive and angry at the same time. She approached us and said she'd been looking everywhere for him. My husband told her she needed to leave because this was a private event. She responded by saying it was private, but that she was supposed to be here, that they were supposed to be together. I told her she wasn't invited and that she needed to leave before we called security. She looked at me like she just noticed I existed, and the hatred in her eyes made me take a step back. She asked me who I thought I was and declared that he was hers, that they were meant to be together. My husband reminded her that he'd told her 100 times he wasn't interested, that he was married now, and that she needed to accept that and move on. She refused, saying no, that he was confused, that I tricked him or something. She insisted he was supposed to be with her. People were starting to notice the commotion. My cousin had already started moving closer, though he was trying to be discreet about it. The woman was getting more agitated by the second. We were standing near the cake table, where we'd just been about to do the traditional cake cutting. The knife was still sitting there on the small plate next to the cake. In one swift motion, she grabbed it and pointed it at my husband. She threatened that if he didn't divorce me right now, right this instant, she swore she'd stab me in front of all these people. Screams erupted around us. Some guests started backing away, others froze in shock. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The knife wasn't huge, but it was sharp enough to do serious damage. My husband told her to put the knife down, that she didn't want to do this. She said yes she did, that he was hers, that he was never allowed to get married or be with someone else, that she had chosen him. I told her she couldn't just choose someone who doesn't want her. She screamed at me to shut up and said this was all my fault, that if I hadn't come along, everything would be perfect. She took a step toward me, raising the knife slightly. I couldn't move. My legs felt like concrete. That's when my cousin made his move. He'd been slowly positioning himself behind her, staying low and quiet. In one practiced motion, he stepped forward and struck her wrist with precision, knocking the knife clean out of her hand. It clattered across the floor. Before she could even react, he had her arm twisted behind her back and her face pressed against the floor. My cousin told her not to move and that she wasn't going anywhere. She screamed at him to get off her, to let her go, that my husband was hers. She was screaming and thrashing, but my cousin held her down. Two of the groomsmen rushed over to help keep her restrained while someone called the actual on-duty police. My cousin directed someone to get that knife away from there and told everyone to stay back. The woman kept screaming about how my husband belonged to her, how I'd ruined everything, how this wasn't over. It was honestly terrifying to watch someone so completely detached from reality. The police arrived within 10 minutes. They took statements from everyone who witnessed what happened, and they arrested her on the spot. Assault with a deadly weapon, threats, trespassing, the works. My cousin gave his statement as both a witness and the person who subdued her. After she was hauled away in the back of the police car, still screaming, there was this weird stunned silence over the whole reception. Then my grandmother, of all people, walked up to the DJ booth. My grandmother announced that it had been exciting, but that we were here for a wedding, so we should get back to celebrating. The DJ started playing music again, and slowly people began to relax. We did eventually cut the cake with a different knife someone brought from the kitchen. My cousin got a huge round of applause and several free drinks for the rest of the night. My husband held me close for the rest of the evening. We found out later that she'd been stalking his social media for months, which is how she knew about the wedding. She'd created multiple fake accounts after he'd blocked her original one. The police found evidence of her obsession going back almost 2 years. She ended up with a restraining order, jail time, and mandatory psychiatric evaluation. We had to testify at her hearing, which wasn't fun, but at least she wouldn't be bothering us anymore. Our wedding photos are interesting to say the least. There are beautiful shots of the ceremony, lovely, candid moments during the reception, and then several dramatic photos of my cousin tackling a crazy woman to the ground while guests scatter in the background. We framed one of those too. It's a good conversation starter. I used to own a fulfillment company, and this was back when the business was really starting to pick up. For context, we specialized in helping Amazon sellers with their logistics. Basically, these sellers would have their products shipped to us directly from the manufacturers, and we'd handle all the bundling, labeling, and prep work needed to get everything ready for Amazon's warehouses. It was a straightforward service, but it required a lot of coordination and attention to detail. At this point in the business, I just brought on a new guy to handle our marketing. We needed to expand our client base, and he seemed like he knew what he was doing with online advertising. His main job was setting up campaigns targeting Amazon-related keywords, since that was our primary market. You know, terms like Amazon fulfillment, prep services for Amazon sellers, that kind of thing. The goal was to catch people who were actively looking for the services we provided. The phone in our office rang one afternoon, and I picked it up like I always did. We were still small enough that I handled a lot of the initial customer contacts myself. I answered the phone and introduced myself, letting her know she'd reached the fulfillment company and asking what I could do for her. There was a brief pause on the other end, and then I heard a woman's voice. She sounded agitated right from the start. She asked if this was Amazon. I blinked, a bit confused by the question. We got calls from people who worked with Amazon all the time, but nobody had ever actually asked if we were Amazon before. I told her no, but explained that we did ship to Amazon. I clarified that we were a fulfillment service that helped sellers prepare their inventory for Amazon warehouses. I figured that would clear things up. It seemed straightforward to me. Then she dropped a bombshell. She told me that our driver just ran into her mailbox and she wanted compensation for the damage. Now I was really confused. I leaned back in my chair trying to process what she just said. I told her I thought there'd been some confusion here. I explained again that we weren't Amazon. We were a separate company. She wasn't having any of it. Her voice was getting louder, and I could tell she was getting more worked up. She insisted that I just said we were Amazon. I tried to keep my tone calm and professional. I repeated that what I'd said was that we shipped to Amazon. I explained that we help Amazon sellers prepare their products, but we're not Amazon themselves. She cut me off. She said that was the same thing and accused me of trying to trick her. I decided to try a different approach. I asked her to think about it for a second. I pointed out that she should consider whether Amazon would really have a local phone number and answer on the second ring. I asked her when the last time was that she called any major corporation and got through to someone that quickly. I thought maybe pointing out the obvious would help her realize her mistake. Amazon's customer service was notorious for long wait times and automated systems. There was no way she'd reach a real person at Amazon headquarters in under 30 seconds. But she didn't care about any of that. She repeated that our truck hit her mailbox and now we were going to pay for it. I tried one more time to explain. I told her again that we don't have delivery drivers. I explained that we don't deliver to residential addresses at all. We only ship bulk inventory to Amazon warehouses. Whatever happened to her mailbox, it wasn't us. She accused me of lying to her. Then she threatened to call the police and report this. She said I was going to be in serious trouble. At this point, I realized there was absolutely no getting through to her. She had convinced herself that she'd somehow reached Amazon, and nothing I said was going to change her mind. Some people just lock into an idea and refuse to let go no matter what evidence you present them with. I told her that calling the police was actually a great idea. I said they could help her figure out who actually hit her mailbox and get her the compensation she deserved. Then I wished her a nice day and hung up before she could respond. I just sat there for a minute staring at the phone and trying to wrap my head around what had just happened. How do you even reach that level of confusion? How do you call a random local business and immediately jump to the conclusion that you've somehow connected directly with one of the largest companies in the world? I got up from my desk and walked over to where my marketing guy was working on his laptop. He looked up when he saw me approaching. He asked if everything was okay. I told him we needed to talk about those keyword campaigns he was running. He looked curious and asked what was up. He wondered if we weren't getting enough leads. I told him we were getting leads all right. Then I explained that I just got off the phone with someone who thought we were Amazon corporate and wanted us to pay for her mailbox that got hit by a delivery truck. He stared at me for a second, clearly trying to figure out if I was joking. He asked me to repeat what I just said. I went through the whole thing again. I explained how she clicked on our ad looking for Amazon, called us, and refused to believe we weren't actually Amazon. Then she threatened to call the police on us. He said that was insane. I agreed with him. I told him I knew we needed to target Amazon-related keywords to reach our actual customers, but we needed to make it crystal clear in the ads that we're not Amazon. I asked if he could adjust a copy to make that more obvious. Maybe add something like third-party fulfillment service, or we work with Amazon sellers right in the headline. He agreed right away. He said he'd revise all the campaigns that afternoon. He admitted he didn't think anyone would actually confuse us with Amazon themselves, but he guessed you can never underestimate people's ability to not read things carefully. I agreed. I told him the last thing we needed was more confused people calling us about delivery problems that have nothing to do with us. He got to work on the revisions right away, and thankfully we never got another call like that again. We had this manager that everyone who worked there knew about her. She worked the day shifts, so I barely ever saw her, but the stories got around. People called her all sorts of things behind her back, but she had this reputation for being absolutely horrible to the staff. She'd scream at people over tiny mistakes, write them up for nothing, and just make everyone's life miserable. I heard she made one guy cry in the break room once because he took an extra 5 minutes on his lunch. Real piece of work. The thing is, I got lucky with my schedule. Since I came in around 4 in the afternoon and worked until close, I managed to avoid her almost completely. She'd usually be gone by the time I arrived, or we'd just pass each other briefly without interaction. I saw her a handful of times over those 2 years, and each time I kept my head down and stayed out of her way. I wasn't about to give her any reason to notice me. Eventually, I found a better opportunity. A construction yard nearby was hiring, and they were offering better pay with better hours. I put in my 2 weeks at the store, worked my final shifts, and started my new job. It was completely different work, obviously. I was helping manage inventory, loading materials, dealing with contractors who came to pick up supplies. The job required me to wear a high-visibility vest all day, which was fine, safety regulations and all that. About 3 weeks into the new job, I realized I needed to pick up a few things for my apartment. Some cleaning supplies, maybe some snacks, just random stuff. The old store was still the closest one to my place, so I figured I'd just stop in after work. It was convenient, and I didn't think twice about it. I'd just finished my shift at the construction yard, and in my rush to get to the store before it got too crowded, I completely forgot I was still wearing my high-vis vest. I just grabbed my wallet, got in my car, and drove over. I walked into the store and grabbed a basket, heading toward the cleaning supplies aisle. I was maybe 2 minutes into my shopping when I heard this loud, sharp voice behind me. Someone was calling out, "Excuse me," repeatedly, getting louder each time. I turned around and there she was, the manager. I recognized her immediately even though we'd barely interacted before. She was storming toward me with this furious expression, and I genuinely had no idea what was happening. She demanded to know if I'd heard her calling me and asked what was wrong with me people. I was confused and asked her what she meant. She told me not to play dumb with her. She said there was a trolley left in the middle of the car park, and it had been sitting there for at least 20 minutes. She wanted it dealt with immediately. That's when it clicked. She saw the vest. She thought I worked there. I hadn't worked at this store in weeks, but she'd seen the high-vis vest and just assumed I was one of the trolley boys who collected cards from the parking lot. She had no idea who I was. I could have corrected her immediately, but honestly, this was too good. I just stood there holding my basket and let her keep going. She asked if I was listening to her. She went on about how she didn't know what they were teaching people these days, but when a manager gave an instruction, it needed to be followed. She wanted that trolley brought in right away, and then she wanted me to do a full sweep of the car park because there were probably more trolleys out there. She was getting more worked up, her voice getting louder. A couple of other customers were starting to look over, clearly uncomfortable. A smirk started creeping across my face. The whole situation was just absurd. She noticed my expression and demanded to know what I was laughing at. She said it with this indignant tone, like she had no clue why I'd find anything amusing while she was talking to me. I told her plainly that I didn't work there anymore, called her a horrible witch, and told her to go away. I didn't sugarcoat it. I'd heard enough stories about how she treated people, and now she just tried to order me around like I was her employee. Her mouth dropped open, her eyes went wide, and she just stood there frozen. She looked like someone had slapped her. I didn't stick around to see what she'd do next. I turned around, finished grabbing what I needed, paid at the self-checkout, and left. The whole time I was checking out, I could see her standing in the same spot, still looking shocked. But here's the thing, I wasn't done. When I got home, I went online and found the head office contact information for the store chain. I wrote up a detailed complaint about her behavior. I explained that I was a former employee, that I'd come in as a customer, and that she'd approached me aggressively and tried to order me around based on nothing but the fact that I was wearing a high-vis vest. I mentioned that I'd heard numerous complaints about her from current employees during my time there, and that her behavior toward me was completely unacceptable. I didn't expect much to come from it, honestly. I just figured it was worth a shot. A few months later, I ran into one of my old co-workers at a coffee shop. We got to talking, and I asked how things were at the store. He told me I hadn't heard the news. That manager got fired about a month earlier. He said there were multiple complaints about her bullying staff and harassing people. Head office finally had enough and let her go. He mentioned that everyone had been way happier since she left. I didn't tell him about my complaint, but I had a pretty good feeling it had contributed. Good riddance to her. Some people just shouldn't be in charge of others. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.